Mother Clare, you've talked about the mystical Christian path as being a combination between the Eastern and Western paths. How is that possible?
When we think of the Eastern paths, many of us tend to think of meditation, of people doing various spiritual practices that may seem a little strange to an average Westerner, very intensive. And we also think of states of illumination, of samadhi, of nirvana, of people actually leaving the consciousness that most of us consider normal and entering into quite altered states in which they may not feel pain anymore. They may be constantly in peace, in joy, in bliss. So this is often our associations of the Eastern paths. The mystical Christian path, which I teach and live and practice, has elements of that in it. We meditate daily, deeply, profoundly. We teach people to move beyond their thinking and their emotions, to drop into a deep inner state of stillness into which they can connect with the divine. We teach them that they can be transformed in this state, that they can come to know God, the divine, directly and personally, that they can have real experiences of that. We also tell them that you really need a teacher to help you get there. And that is something most people associate with the Eastern paths. The Eastern paths have the spiritual teachers, they have the gurus. And most in Western society find that strange and have said, well, I just read my own Bible, I'll figure out my own way. Unfortunately, that's pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, and you can only go so far. If you ever reach down and grab your bootstraps and pull, you notice you'll never get off the ground. It is the same with your own spiritual efforts. You can have some insights, but you'll never grow in the enormous transformational means that we see happens when people work with true gurus in the East. That is how I started. I heard when I was in my late teens about the great gurus of the East, and I said, that's what I want. I want that kind of training. I want transformational training. I lived in yoga ashrams, and I was in Sufi training also, live-in intensive programs, and I didn't find it. There were gurus, but they were far away from directly teaching me. I got my instructions, I had my meditations, I learned all the techniques that were needed. I lived in yoga ashrams for 3 years, and my teacher came around once a year and gave me new instructions. But I noticed that neither I nor anyone else living in the ashram, the various ones I lived in, was actually transforming those deep inner issues. We weren't changing our moodiness. We weren't changing our bad attitudes. When we were together working in the kitchen, we were as grouchy and mean to each other. Our communication was as bad as ever. And I found there was something not working for me, for us Westerners it seemed, maybe it works for the Easterners, in the way those teachings were being given for most people. And that is, they weren't being applied enough to our day-to-day issues, and they weren't being applied enough to our emotional and psychological issues. They were generalized in many ways, the grandness of the joy of the blissfulness of mindful being. They have, when you listen to them, they're very inspiring with, we get a sense of India is this amazing place where people just levitate and enter other states, and all you need to do is join this yogic society and you too will be this altered mystic type. I went that way. I tried it. I applied myself. I looked at the others around me, and I didn't see people were transforming. And I discovered that actually the West knows a thing or two about transformation. And that is because we actually have discovered through psychology that what people are carrying in their minds and hearts can't just be ignored and blown away. It can't just be overseen. It needs to be addressed for people to really transform. Otherwise, it's repressed, and then we have trouble. I did not find that the Eastern teachings addressed this enough. So when it was time for me to really see what worked and what did I want to be teaching and doing, I pulled on my background as a psychotherapist, in Jungian psychology, knowing about the consciousness and the unconscious, and pull these in with the pull the psychological in with the spiritual. Now we have something that actually works on all levels to transform us, that addresses the deep aspects of the spiritual as well as the psychological and emotional issues that get in the way of becoming that enlightened spiritual person. They work together. This is where Western and mystical Christianity has pulled together the best of both worlds, where we have the depth connection and the transformative states. We do come into illumination, and we do bring people into self-realization. And we work with their issues within themselves and their workplace and their marriages and their children and their communication skills and their fears and angers and anxieties and their sorrows and depressions. That is wholesome. That addresses what really needs to be addressed for transformation. Without those elements, something is missing. The psychological without the spiritual will not bring you healing and transformation. The spiritual without the psychological is going to repress issues and not bring real transformation. We have a combination of that in what we do. What I teach is a combination of that. What our order brings to people and helps them through is that beautiful bouquet of flowers that has come to us from all sides. Without it, I don't see real transformation happening for many people. For a few it does. Clearly, numbers of great gurus have arisen from the East. Clearly for them it worked. Clearly for the masses it has not worked. When we bring these two together, we have something that can work for the ordinary person. That is what is needed in the world today, and that is what Christian mysticism can bring.